Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, for this generous introduction to the museum and the work we do there. And I am privileged to be invited here and share my thoughts on this wonderful recent works by Mongolian painter Uuriintuya Dagvasambuu, or Uri, as she can be called shorter. And it's a great pleasure also for me to visit Allen Memorial Art Museum. Thank you, Kevin, for the invitation. Thank you, Jill, Jessica, for organizing the talk, and all of you for coming here tonight. I should warn you that I'm not a specialist of contemporary Mongolian painting, um, referred to as Mongol Zurag. Rather, I am someone who is trained at how to look and see, an art historian and curator familiar with Buddhist culture and Buddhist art. I also ask questions that help bring in meaning and provide context. I did ask the artist quite a few questions, and she was very gracious to address them. And this is what I'm mostly going to share with you today. My thoughts clarified by the artist's voice to help make her at home here and to make her painting to come a bit more alive and unpack the human dimension of her paintings. So you may have already seen this painting in the installation, Echoes of the Pandemic. But before we dive into the painting and discuss what you can actually decode and mine from looking carefully at it, I would like to present the artist, Uri herself, because I believe knowing the artist a little bit and hearing her voice, so to speak, helps to get a richer experience of her paintings. Knowing that I will be presenting this talk and talking about her art and recent works, I've asked her to point to me an image which is most likely to be seen as her self-portrait. And I had a few examples in mind. You may think that a selfie would be it, right? The title is the obvious giveaway, correct? Here you can really get a sense of her being at home. We see the outside where sheep, horses, and other animals are enjoying the air. She is somewhat virtually engrossed or digitally enveloped state. It seems as these app icons indicate, including a search bar overlaid over the window and additional icons at the bottom of the painting. I hope you can see that. As if we're viewing her through the lens of a computer screen. I think we all had somewhat similar experiences of being chained to a chair and plugged in while not being able to enjoy the outside as these animals are enjoying. Or are they? Well, this selfie, as it turns out, is not the painting that can really be her self-portrait, although this is obviously the artist herself. Here's a detail where you can see her face and the meticulously painted app icons overlaid over her potted plant. So then perhaps this would be her self-portrait. Maybe this I can use. This is an earlier painting, and it expresses a specific feeling or a notion that relates to being and embodying or having space all to oneself. The flowers are Edelweiss, considered the national flower of Mongolia, and they grow on Mongolian steppes under an open sky that stretches forever. Here, the form of her body makes the landscape itself, outlined against the dark blue sky. But it's not the self-portrait I was looking for, even though, again, this is the image of the artist herself, right? So I think any of this could be her self-portraits, which technically they are because these are her images or images of her. But she does not feel as strongly about them as about the other painting I will show you eventually, I promise. In the painting on the left, the artist is playing with the idea of circus performances, where performers are exhibiting their strengths and skill amidst the clouds of fear, expectations, doubt, and hopes from the crowds that want to be entertained. Are we the crowd looking at her, or is this her imagining these things in her mind? I read in this painting her potential frustration with such expectations, as if she has to perform and entertain while she might feel vulnerable. Any resonances in the crowds here? The painting on the right is a detail of another work related to pandemic, referring to the safe distance between people that was advised to maintain at this during these times. Yeah, and again, Edelweiss's here and the clouds are present. This detail of the painting shows her as well. The idea of protection comes up often in her work and takes various gazes. And all of this has to do with the fact that she is a mother who takes care and protects her child. But by now, you probably notice that many of her paintings contain her own image, or in other words, her paintings are autobiographical in nature or narrative and tell stories, right? So now maybe you think that this probably is the one. The artist is showed here as someone who is busy with the everyday tasks. The clouds are perhaps her thoughts that accommodate her thinking about multiple things: making bread, cooking porridge, ironing, etc. And you can find all of these references in the painting, right? She is either removing or inserting an earphone or earpiece and has binoculars hanging from her neck. Multitasking is what comes to mind, right? Perhaps this is a usual day in the life of a mother. I'm sure many of you, and probably anyone can relate to this image. We're not sure if the figure is the artist herself, but I think this is her as well. And she is again, she really encompasses in her being numerous real and symbolic things, notions, and attributes. You could read in this painting, quote unquote, swimming with the fishes, or barely escaping such fate, being caught in the net, at least partially, coming off the boat with your meager possessions, hoping for a transformation, butterfly wings, or oozing the anxiety and needing to take care of many things, as indicated by multiple hands. And finally, we're at the painting which the artist says is the closest to how she sees herself, at least at present. Who would have guessed? She says, I quote, "I am close to 30 dB. dB stands for decibels, a sound measuring scale. A whisper is about 30 dB. Normal conversation is about 60 decibels." And she says, "I'm hard of hearing in the left ear. So I inquire, ask, like mining for more information, like people trying to keep up with gossip." Hearing is one of our main senses, and it's important to listen and hear. We get a lot of our information through listening and hearing. As students and professors, you all know this really well. For Uri, this seems even more heightened. How much we can miss when we do not hear, even though we listen. This brings up a rather large philosophical notion with which people continue to have complicated experiences over centuries. And nowadays, it is happening across all human relationships, from politics in society, social conversations, personal relationships, and more. I find it very telling that the body of the woman here, which is Uri, the artist herself, is filled with clouds and various human forms who seem to be struggling or somewhat moving energetically within the confines of her being. While her face has a very pleasant flower pattern, which is disarming, charming, and traditional. Like there is a layer of printed cloth or paper that protects her. You can see her glasses, which make her seem having two sets of eyes. This hearing aid, which she uses to indicate the need to hear better, is a flower, a metaphor for a beautiful natural tool, our ears. But at the same time, it also looks a bit like a cone of a loudspeaker, which is used to project the sound, not take it in. And curiously, it goes all the way through and out the other ear, literally goes in one ear and out the other. Does this imply that what comes in is not that important, perhaps? Given what we have learned from the artist, these strange forms now can be probably understood as bits of information about people, their tangled relationships, struggles, and so on. And the nest of tied together women and birds may be felt as gossip, like chattering of birds that never stops. I think it all depends on the context, as I have interpreted such images differently elsewhere. The blackbirds are a recurring element in Uri's paintings. They're also present in the pandemic diptych. As we return to the painting in the museum's collection, we can now look at it closely. The artist said that the idea for the painting came about because of the confusing reality in which she and most people in Mongolia found themselves in during that time. In the beginning, the people's beliefs towards vaccines and their effectiveness varied and ranged from denial, doubt, disbelief, rejection. But when the time came to get vaccinated, everyone lined up in an orderly fashion, staying in line without hindering each other. This was what motivated her to paint this work. When asked about the format of the painting, why she painted a diptych, the artist said that she wanted to paint a long sequence, but didn't have a long frame. So she took a chance of having these two paintings rather than a long one. She also had limited space because she painted at home, creating for all of the exhibitions that she had to work on. She couldn't go to her studio, which was far from her home. And even though this was an interesting challenge to find a solution working with given possibilities, she decided to make this a diptych. She also shared that although this was a terrible epidemic, we were all under quarantine, but it seemed on the one hand that everything was in order. And on the other hand, it seemed that we had returned to the communist world. It seems not so long ago that Mongolians were listening to the 11 o'clock news on national television every day. In that news, they used to hear the number of people who got infected and died. And she continues, when my husband and I were going back after vaccination, buses don't run after 12 p.m. at noon. Taxis and personal cars were forbidden. So we walked home for 3 hours on the street with no cars. The whole process felt like I was living in a surreal world. And I'm sure that you also had similar surreal experiences and stories looking back to that time. Let's look at the painting closely. The curtain. It hides the mystery which is behind it, but the warmth of the floral pattern has a convincing or disarming charm. Blackbirds perched on a curtain represent people's distrust and suspicion towards getting actual protection or immunity. The person covered with foliage on the left side of the curtain is a vaccinated person who feels protected. But the people in a row on the right side of the curtain are people waiting to be vaccinated. The unique nature of the characters reflects their own beliefs in the vaccine, fear, and doubt, which the artist brings out, aided by her observation of these random people guessing their inner feelings in these surreal images. Here, we see details from both sides of the diptych. These quite strange looking people waiting to be vaccinated. I find it thought-provoking that some of them are nothing but patterned shadows, as if hidden in their own thoughts. And the others seem to be composites of various states, feelings of thoughts, while others are quite ordinary looking, like this woman with a blue scarf and a mask, relatively ordinary looking. When asked whether the format of the painting has a specific significance related to the dualities of being protected or not protected, having been vaccinated or not, or with the time periods, one being before and another being after, or seeing from the inside out, the artist responded that all of these are also true readings of these depictions. And here we have an image of the artist herself. I quote, "The woman with the flying carpet. I am the one who observes people." At the bottom of the painting, the grazing sheep are facing in the opposite direction of the people in line. This shows how the concept of peace and free movement on the plains, the steppes, or on land, which is Mongolian people's common activity, changed in modern times, especially during the pandemic, and became regulated as opposed to the free movement of animals. Here, we can perhaps see how things were after that first vaccine shot. The artist seems to picture her thoughts on holding everything together during the stressful and uncertain time, where the worry is the large sphere comprised of swirling black clouds with black birds, a thought form that visually expresses that feeling indicates. The notions of cleanliness that were paramount during the time, as you remember, various other thought forms that have human and animals hanging on, as well as the bright oval bubble or balloon-like thought form made of lighter, warm-colored clouds and helping hands, indicating hope after the first dose of the vaccine. They're all tied together as threads of thoughts, which are being spun into one yarn, an explicitly feminine practice of creating things that ultimately protect, like woolen sweaters, hats, gloves, and so on. The idea of protection is an important notion that is prominent in Uuri's paintings. In her recent series exhibited in 2023 in New York, Uuri explored ideas perhaps directly inspired by traditional Buddhist paintings. You can find an essay about this body of work on Sapar Contemporary Gallery's website. Here, I'd like to bring in a few images that would give some context to the visual language with which the artist is familiar. She is not replicating it or, quote unquote, transforming it. Rather, Uuri is using her own visual language comprised of diverse and whimsical vocabulary that she herself developed, which often includes traditional symbolic forms and iconographic elements, providing another dimension to her paintings. In her own words, symbolic traditions have changed with the times and have been used only as forms. This is related to how we carry on our culture and traditions in today's globalized Mongolia. For me, this image evokes various associations, one of which is the guardian figure, like the one you see here. And another is of a deity of compassion who holds a lotus, as in this painting. I have asked the artist a question about this painting on the left, saying that the figure seems to resemble Avalokiteshvara, or Chenrezig in Tibetan and Mongolian, a Buddhist deity who usually holds a lotus flower. In her painting, the figure is a woman. Traditionally, this lotus-holding deity is considered a male or rather gender neutral. In Chinese Buddhist tradition, he, Avalokiteshvara, assumed a particular form becoming she, Guanyin. And I asked whether Uri intentionally changed it here, or was this changed because her main subject is always a woman? She responded yes, that she did intentionally change the figure's gender, explaining that as a social construct, gender can vary from one society to another and change over time. When asked about the use of lotus thrones, which are elements from traditional Buddhist art, and whether there is a particular meaning of having her figures stand on them, she responded, the throne or lotus flower symbolizes rebirth and purity in Buddhism. My painting also represents authority. In today's Mongolian society, anyone would consider the old forms and meaning as pure and authentic. The artist also says that she acknowledges the unique and special nature of Asian cultures and art, not only Mongolian, and I quote, we look at our heritage and culture from a different perspective, and there are various manifestations of thoughts about where the difference between our country and other countries lies. In modern times, this distinction seems to be blurring. That is why new and old things coexist in my images. Here, in the detail from vaccine first dose, you can see almost direct quotes of Buddhist ornamental elements. The ravens, which are birds associated with protector deity Mahakala, the guardian of Mongolian state and its people. On the right, the embroidered satin banner shows peaceful and wrathful symbolic offerings to Mahakala. There's a small blue-green rock at the right edge. In the center is a group of symbols known as the 7 jewels of a king. Between them are 7 weapons. The wrathful offerings are in the lower portion of the work and include 7 different animals, among them a white Bactrian camel and a black snow lion. The skull cup between them contains an offering of the 5 senses. In her latest painting, in a series of paintings, Uuriintuya focuses again on elements of nature or environment. As she noted about her recurring pictorial motifs of clouds, flowers, and rocks, they take special part in Mongolian paintings. Other elements which we have already seen, such as the ravens, sheep, and rich textiles as patterns used for an object, a figure, or forming a background. When they appear in her pictures, the symbolic meaning of the iconography is truly hers. Their meanings are liberated. They become a part of the plot in the story of the painting or the decoration in the composition she creates. On the right is the embroidered image of the symbolic offerings to a deity, which are offered seeking protection. And as you recognize on the left, is the detail from the pandemic diptych that shows a person who feels protected after receiving the first dose of the vaccine. Here, the surreal image of a bathtub filled with tangled human figures, implying the humanity as a large, messy group of ghost-like beings, might refer to being anchored in place and fixated on cleanliness, referencing the time of the quarantine and lockdown. Here, the sheep are shown as free agents as opposed to the confined and listless human mess. On the right, no less surreal, you can see ravens and wild animals ravaging human corpses which is a reminder in this Buddhist painting of the impermanence of life and human existence, urging us to be more compassionate towards each other and all living creatures. People can read her images in various ways. For instance, in this image, sheep are grazing among the seashells, which is quite strange, especially for Mongolian steppes. As you know, Mongolia is a landlocked country. These shells, though, can be understood as fossils as well, which are actually abound in the steppes. You may know that Mongolian steppes rendered a lot of dinosaur bones. Speaking of some major fossilized finds. But these seashells can also be seen as containers of life, things that protect the occupants and provide shelter. Here we have protection again. Coincidentally, the Rubin Museum has collaborated with Uri to create an illustration for an essay that will be featured in our Spiral magazine, which is coming out in print and online on March 15th, next week. I couldn't show the image here, sorry. But you'll see it if you find it. The essay is about a Christian nun hermit, Antonella Lumini, who is a contemporary urban hermit, or sometimes is also referred to as metropolitan hermit. She practices pustinia, or silence and solitude, derived from the Orthodox tradition of eliminating distractions in order to be able to hear the voice of God. And she does this practice in her house in the center of Florence, contained within her own house. Uri's painting depicts a shell containing a hidden or hermetic human being. As you can see, Uri's symbolism is different and unique, at times informed by the traditional forms. However, she expects people to read her paintings and understand them using their own frames of reference, including their own feelings and the common visual language of the 21st century digital and connected world. Also, our everyone humans concerns, some of which you can probably see in this painting, and perhaps because she is a woman and a mother, recognizing thoughts and wishes that women and mothers face every day. She mentioned to me the theory that was introduced by French philosopher Roland Barthes in his 1967 essay called The Death of the Author. This literary theory argues that the meaning of a text is not determined by the author's intention, but rather by the reader's interpretation. Applying this idea to her art, she insists that, quote, what is more important is that from the birth of the painting, the audience gets a new feeling different from mine. The end result is what they decipher and read. I like it, end of quote. She also said about her paintings and the feelings they evoke. It is in the same way VR and even headphones give the impression that the person is living in the middle of two worlds. And speaking of digital worlds, I would like to introduce our project Himalayan Art, where you can learn, if you're interested, about contemporary Tibetan art, because we have an essay about that there. Project Himalayan Art can be accessed through a digital platform. It's an educational initiative which was launched last year and designed to introduce the art from the Himalayan, Tibetan, and culturally related regions, such as Mongolian cultural areas, to the general public and to be used for teaching as well. You can scan the QR code and it can take you to the website where you can explore to your heart's content. And with that, thank you very much.